Hello, hello. I'm going to go ahead and just start playing this. I'm just doing an update because I'm getting ready and I'm getting ready to leave. I'm evacuating myself, but I'm just going to let this update play.
The reputation actually is based in some fact because almost 15% of retired storms beginning with the letter I, more than any other letter in the alphabet, that is the letter that gets retired. In reality, though, it is less about the letter itself, a little more about timing. Let's dive into this. When you look at when I storms occur, the most recent example can take us to Hurricane Ian. It was a deadly Category 5 storm, made landfall end of September. Tragically, Ian led to the deaths of at least 150 people, mostly due to surge. It caused more than 110 billion in damage, and it was retired. You look back at storms that have been retired with the letter I, and we have 13 of them. Some of those have actually impacted Florida. Retired ice storms to hit the state: Irma, Inez, and Ivan, 2004, 20 years ago. You look at these storms, a lot of them left a mark to be remembered, which is why they were retired. We look at Stephen, going back in history, several storms. The ones that stand out, though, a lot of them have to do with the letter I when you just do a quick recall.
Yeah, it's not just Florida. It's, as we were looking at, it was Texas, Hurricane Ike. It was at one point a Category 4 hurricane. It was also devastating to other parts in the Caribbean. But when we had that landfall in the United States, it was the Bolivar Peninsula, Galveston, a storm surge of 15 to 20 foot above normal tide. That's what this storm will be known as. Now, the wind field was significant. And I think it's important to talk about this because the storm surge and the threat is very much a function of how big the storm is. Right now, we have Idalia with winds extending from the center about 150, 160 miles an hour. From the center with Ike, we were well over 220 miles. That was the radius of those winds. When you have a wind field producing tropical storm force like that, it is certain to provide a huge storm surge, and that's what we saw. It claimed 10 lives in the United States alone, and it was a $1 billion disaster.
Also a Gulf storm. Also a Gulf storm. So you look at the scenario,
Labor Day,
the timing, yes, is very similar. You have a very warm Gulf. The characteristics of the storm might end up different, but the letter I typically falls in this time zone. And so that's why a lot of these storms, with the start of the name with an I, turn out to be retired storms. They're happening in the heat of the season.
I think what's also eerie is when you go back 2 years ago, you had Hurricane Ida, which unfortunately slammed Louisiana as a Category 4 storm and had max winds of 150 miles per hour. And it's estimated that more than 100 people died, and it toppled about $75 billion in estimated damage. You know, there were some reports here, Amy, that there was a ship that was over in the port of Fushan, I should say, and they reported max winds of 190 miles per hour. Now, that was unofficial. So the official report was 150 miles per hour. But that just really shows you, I mean, just how, strong this is. But, again, I think the anniversary, August 29th, which is today. And now we're talking about another ice storm knocking on the door.
Right. This is both, I think, the myth and the reality of the I storm is when you move into this part of the alphabet, we're typically reaching into both the calendar halfway point of September 1st. We're also reaching into the peak of the season, which is traditionally September 10th. When you look at the climate data over a long period of time, we're only 10 days outside of that. And so sometimes we get into the peak right as we're moving into this portion of the alphabet. So as you remember the name Idalia and that letter I, remember some of the storms historically that have left a mark. Fox Weather is your hurricane HQ. Idalia expected to undergo
But when we had that landfall in the United States, it was the Bolivar Peninsula, Galveston, a storm surge of 15 to 20 foot above normal tide. That's what this storm will be known as. Now, the wind field was significant. And I think it's important to talk about this because the storm surge and the threat is very much a function of how big the storm is. Right now, we have Idalia with winds extending from the center about 150, 160 miles an hour. From the center with Ike, we were well over 220 miles. That was the radius of those winds. When you have a wind field producing tropical storm force like that, it is certain to provide a huge storm surge. And that's what we saw. It claimed 10 lives in the United States alone, and it was a $1 billion disaster.
Also a Gulf
14
storm. Also a
Yeah.
Gulf storm. So you look at the
Labor Day,
scenario,
this
the
time frame.
timing, yes, is very similar. You have a very warm Gulf. The characteristics of the storm might end up different, but the letter I typically falls in this time zone. And so that's why a lot of these storms, with the start of the name with an I, turn out to be retired storms. They're happening in the heat of the season.
I think what's also eerie is when you go back 2 years ago, you had Hurricane Ida, which unfortunately slammed Louisiana as a Category 4 storm and had max winds of 150 miles per hour. And it's estimated that more than 100 people died, and it toppled about $75 billion
Oof, wow,
in
look at
estimated
that.
damage. You know, there were some reports here, Amy, that there was a ship that was over in the port of Foshan, I should say, and they reported max winds of 190 miles per hour. Now, that was unofficial. So the official report was 150 miles per hour. But that just really shows you, I mean, just how, strong this is. But, again, I think the anniversary, August 29th, which is today. And now we're talking about another ice storm knocking on the door.
Right. This is both, I think, the myth and the reality of the ice storm is when you move into this part of the alphabet, we're typically reaching into both the calendar halfway point of September 1st. We're also reaching into the peak of the season, which is traditionally September 10th. When you look at the climate data over a long period of time, we're only 10 days outside of that. And so sometimes we get into the peak right as we're moving into this portion of the alphabet. So as you remember the name Idalia and that letter I, remember some of the storms historically that have left a mark. Fox Weather is your hurricane HQ. Idalia expected to undergo as it exits the Atlantic coastline. We're with you throughout the duration of the storm. Weather Command is your hurricane HQ right through landfall.
This is Rachel at Cardholder Services, calling in
trying
reference
to
to your
reach
current
you
credit
about
card
your
balance.
car's extended
There are no
warranty.
problems.
We also have Jana Lewis has team coverage. Joining me on the desk today, as always, Stephen Morgan is here analyzing the storm. We also have Jana Lewis with the inland threats. Plus, along with us in Weather Command, Fox Weather hurricane specialist Brian Norcross is here. He'll break down the advisory. We have straight ahead live coverage, reports that'll come in advance of Idalia's landfall as a major hurricane. Reporters and meteorologists are in place across Florida, Britta Merwin in Tampa, Robert Ray in Clearwater Beach, Brandy Campbell in Tallahassee at the Emergency Operations Headquarters. And also we've got coverage from Fox platforms, including our affiliates already in the storm zone. Across the board, Fox Weather has you covered. Let's get the latest now. The National Hurricane Center advisory coming in. We're looking for the details and what has potentially changed. Get it right over to Brian. Brian, we're looking at the numbers coming in and what changes we're going to see from the storm. This is the rapid intensification phase that we knew was underway. What does it bring for us?
Well, we see when we look at the satellite and on radar, the system is close enough now that we're seeing it on Key West radar. It's going to move into the range of Tampa radar. Here we are, 85-mile-an-hour winds now as of the new advisory at 11 o'clock, moving north at 14. So that was what we talked about, speeding up as it moves to the north over the Gulf of Mexico, pressure down just a little bit. So pressure goes down, winds go up. It's in terms of intensification, it's on track. The peak intensity near the Florida coast is up on this advisory, but that's not really a change. And I'll show you why it's got to do more with the timing.
Also, I want to learn a little bit about the speed of the storm and how that's a good news, bad news situation going forward.
Yeah, so it's running over just incredibly pristine Gulf water that's deep and warm right now. And I'm going to show you that here in just a second when we look at the cone. But as it picks up and the wind flow that creates this river of air in the atmosphere, that's going to be really just about ideal because it's caught in a river. And you think about when the river is flowing naturally, there's nothing impacting it side to side. It's just caught in that, right? So the only thing it's going to run out of, it looks like, is time to get strong. And that's why it's very hard to pick that out. All right, here's the radar that we were looking at there. That was interesting. I don't know, Jordan, if you saw that. It kind of zoomed in. But you can see, I wanted to show you. Let me see if I can go back. Can I go back and show you the, go back on that one because it's not working for me. Yeah. All right. There we go.
There we go.
All right, there we go. That's what I wanted to see because I wanted to show you this eye here that we see from Key West radar. And these are the outer bands. So the outer bands are already advancing to the north. And this is going to be what's happening today, right? It's going to be one band after the other. And these bands, you were reporting earlier, are already gusting to 40 and 50 miles per hour, right? So this has nothing to do with the eye and what's going on just on the edge of radar range. So it looks like right now there's, that doesn't look very strong, but we can see the circular nature of it, and it's at the extent of the radar. So it's looking way up in the atmosphere that far out. So this is intense and getting more intense here, but these are going to be very strong bands coming through. And this is why we're worried about people waiting until today to do their business and be out on the street.
And Brian, with the outlook that we have for that tornado threat, some of these, the Storm Prediction Center had mentioned, might be EF2 or stronger. And that's of note too, because typically with tropical cyclones, these are generally weaker ones.
Yeah, usually, but it all has to do with how much shear there is in the atmosphere, the directionality of the winds. When you think about it, you have high pressure off to the east, and it's coming in at a southeast direction. The flow around the hurricane is from the southwest. So you immediately have quite a bit of turning in the atmosphere for any storms that develop. So, Jordan, I'm just going to have to kind of do this manually. But there you see, just moving into Naples, and these are very, very gusty, strong storms here.
And so far in advance of really the heart of the storm that we're talking about, this really has nothing to do with the center of the storm that will eventually make landfall, less than 24 hours from now. These are the outer portions of it, which you make the great point. So many people who might want to wait are now going to be running into some pretty fierce storms potentially on the coast of Florida.
Yeah, so here you can look at it on the satellite picture and you can see there's the core of the hurricane. That's where the real damage is going to be done. That's where the strongest winds are. But this hurricane, and we talked about this yesterday, because there's a dip in the jet stream out here, because there's flow coming this way, and this river is created, it's pulling energy out of the hurricane ahead of it. And so we're getting these bands, and there they are there, already advancing up the coast. And each one, as you get closer to the center, is going to be stronger. So some places are not going to get the strongest because the hurricane's going to be offshore when it goes by, right?
We've noticed, too, a bit of a westward shift overall. The National Hurricane Center even mentioning that westward shift. I mean, with the overall track, is that what we see still? Tampa Bay, the risks are still there. Looking at their storm surge threat, we're still 4 to 7 feet. That risk hasn't changed despite the slight changes.
Yeah, no, because here's why. Take a look at the cone. So a couple of things on this graphic. One is I've got ocean heat content here. Ocean heat content is not the temperature of the water. It's how much energy there is in the water to strengthen the storm. And if you notice down in here, it's kind of in the yellow. So right now it's operating on deep warm water. So it has that, right? Once it gets up into the shelf up here, then it doesn't have the deep warm water, but it's going to be moving faster. It becomes less important, unfortunately. Those two things happening. When a storm slows down up in here, then it's a different kind of thing. But in any case, so a couple of things here. One is, notice they now have as their peak wind forecast 125 miles per hour. That's not because they think it's going to be stronger than it was yesterday, just because of the way the timing of his advisories work out. Yesterday, the line was down here, and so it still had that time before the coast to be stronger. And when you say 125, you always add 10% or so. Yeah. So we're talking about the potential, everybody's got to be thinking in their head category 4, right? This is right below category 4 strength. So you always think in that range. That's what the National Hurricane Center thinks, is they don't think a number, they think a range. But about the Tampa Bay area, obviously, if the storm stays on the right side, an Ian kind of thing, that puts more energy into Tampa Bay. But the thing is that if you can look at it, it's going to come pretty close to Tampa, not at landfall, but much earlier than landfall. In the early morning hours tomorrow, when the storm is down in here, it's going to be putting water up this way, and that's into Tampa Bay. Right?
Yeah, and because of that direction almost along the coastline, the duration there for Tampa Bay could be longer, which of course increases the threat. I mean, once that water gets trapped in the bay, the damage is already underway.
It doesn't come out. Yeah, here I have a closer view of it there. Yes. So the thing is that once it starts when the wind is like this, and then when the wind is like this, it's directly in. Then when the wind is like this, it's still pushing it in, right? So there's a whole process here, and it's going to happen way before the landfall time up here. So and this is going to deal with the tides in Tampa Bay. Looking at them earlier, I'm going to check them again the next time I talk to you. It was kind of mid tide. So the tides are really funny there. There's 3 feet between the high and low tide. It's a big difference, right? Huge difference.
Right.
So if the kind of maximum reasonable surge is 7 feet, and it comes in at low tide, then the maximum reasonable surge is 4 feet. It's a lot of difference.
Big difference there.
It looks like this is going to happen about mid tide. So about 1.5 feet off of the maximum, according to the current schedule. Not that they're going to change.
Brian, when you talk about the tides, also talk about how they could be impacted by a full moon. I think we're expecting that into tonight as well as tomorrow. Yeah, so we're in what's called a blue moon, which just means the second full moon of the month. And so the tide is about 6 inches higher. The high tide is about 6 inches higher than it would be on an average high tide. So, but that's all calculated into their forecast. That doesn't change
their forecast, and that up to 7 feet in Tampa Bay or up to 15 feet now in the Nature Coast.
Right. So take us through the west, because we went through what happens if we're on the right side of this cone favor. What if we favor west? Because that looks like it puts a scenario that is a real different situation for Cedar Key and what could happen with their storm surge. And that entire bay there, it's a different scenario if we're far to the west. Not necessarily a good story for them either if it's that far
well,
west.
no, I mean, this is Taylor County here, which is a growing county. Perry is the main city there. If the storm were to come up here, I mean, it's going to be very.
I'm just going to play this one here for a few because it's not got no audio. That way I can talk to y'all. Yeah, Jada Empath Love, I'm safe. I promise. I went through Hurricane Ian last year and I learned my lesson this year. I'm fixing to leave right now. I'm going to the middle of Florida. I appreciate your offer, love. Thank you. Ian was supposed to come right at us last year, and it shifted south, and it fucked Fort Myers and stuff up down there. It was bad. I felt sorry for them people. I've said it, man. They had no warning. They could not prepare. It just shifted like it was crazy. But it didn't hit us. And then this one here was coming right at us. They evacuated us. Well, they are today. Everybody's leaving today. I think they better. Because we can still get the storm surge, and that's what they're worried about here. That's where tornadoes and a lot of wind and a hot mess comes. I think we'll get another one this year. Oh, thank you, Jada. Yeah, I hate whenever they tell you to evacuate, it's a whole different fucking feeling. It is. Yeah, they told us yesterday, and it's supposed to hit like way late tonight. And fuck that. Shift more west. Oh yeah, it's going to come. It's going to get some of the west, but like it's shifting north right now. North and south. It was supposed to hit us, and now it's north. It's going to hit more the Panhandle area and Jacksonville. Jacksonville's going to get some of it. Yeah, the west is going to feel it, but not like. I mean, the west. The East Coast is going to feel it. The west, Tampa Bay area and all of us over here on the west coast of Florida, it's fucking horrible. Yeah, Cape Coral, that was a bad area. It was sad. Ian was, it was. And to go through it all, it's really scary. And it's really, I don't see how people do this every year living in Florida. I don't. But it just seems like it's getting worse and worse. See how on the map now it's like where the 3 is? That's more the Panhandle area, Daytona Beach. Then where it says St. Petersburg, that's the Tampa Bay area. See the orange Tampa Bay area. But we were right in that fucking cone of it forever. Well, not ever, because this one came so fast. Then there's another one coming from the East Coast. You're in the Cape now. Yeah, I'm fixing to leave too. I'm going more inland. I'm going to the middle of Florida. Fuck it. I'm getting I'm getting out of this path of this storm. Fuck it. Last year I learned my lesson on this fucking hurricane shit. Well, fuck, might as well stay now. I'm getting be a pro at it. It's scary as fuck. But last year I didn't evacuate. This year, it's a little worse this year though. Because of how fast it's moving. All right, I'm going to listen to some more of it, see what's going on while I'm getting ready.
sawmills and so forth there because of the big tall pine trees for so many years. And big tall pine trees and hurricanes do not go together at all. They snap off at about 15 feet. And we saw that Hurricane Hugo in 1989. We saw it in Hurricane Andrew. Okay, this is your updated storm surge map there, and you see the 15 feet range there from Taylor County, Perry, on down to Cedar Key. Cedar Key averages about 10 feet. The highest points on Cedar Key are about 20 feet.
Well, that's concerning.
And so I was doing a Facebook Live earlier saying, folks in Cedar Key, know where that 20-foot part of Cedar Key is, or get out now, because you got time, right? All along there, people have time to get out now. The weather has not arrived there yet, but it will arrive today. This isn't a wait till and see what happens later today, because the weather will arrive well in advance.
The 15 feet storm surge is up from last advisory. Right. Is that directly related to the intensity of the winds that we're expecting? Because I mean, you think of the size of the storm. The size plays a big role in the Gulf of Mexico with how significant that surge is. But what I've seen more so has just been the winds, that central pressure that we're going to be watching.
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure. There are three factors that affect the storm surge with the storm. One is the strength of the storm, the peak winds. Another, the biggest factor, is the size of the storm. So my guess is they've decided, they've done some forecasting and used the consensus that it's probably a little bit bigger. I'm guessing that's the fact. And the third is the angle of approach. So if the thing comes in at an oblique angle, it doesn't put as much storm surge because some of that energy gets deflected back out, right? If it comes in square on, like it's going to, in this scenario, comes in square on into the Nature Coast up there, that whole part north of metropolitan Tampa, St. Petersburg, called the Nature Coast, then it just puts the full energy of the hurricane in there, and that curved bay up there traps the water in there. So, even if it gets deflected, it still is in that bay, is the point. All right, let me see what we have here next. Oh yeah, so we still have the storm surge warning in effect, and let me go down because I didn't want to get too far gone here before we check on the new alerts that are on here. Look what they've done with the hurricane warning.
Wow, they've taken that across the Florida-Georgia line.
Now they have a hurricane warning into Georgia and back to near Tallahassee. So this might be a time to talk about the issue of the speed of the storm and the side, the right and left side you were talking about, Amy?
Yeah, I think one of the factors here is when we get a fast-moving storm inland, you can keep that wind field intact for a much larger time, and it's reflected here in the hurricane warning. This shows that we've got to look for the potential of trees down, power outages, and beyond, well inland with very fierce winds.
Right, and with trees that are not designed to bend in the hurricane, as we found every time there's a storm. But let's say that the hurricane is 120, well, let's say it's 100 miles an hour. Let's say that that's what the hurricane is generating. If it's moving at 20, on this side, it's 120 miles an hour, and on this side, it's 80. So on the left side, you have two things going on. One is you have the wind coming in from the opposite direction, off the land. More friction, less wind. Another is, on this side, you have it coming off the water, right, on a shorter distance, or over here. So the strongest winds are on the right side of the storm. Not that in this scenario, with a super strong hurricane, on the left side of the storm in Tallahassee, they have a hurricane warning in effect now. Right, and Tallahassee has big old oak trees and long limbs and is very bad in hurricanes.
Tough scenario when these winds come in. Is there anything that could slow the storm down a little bit that minimizes those winds, or does the speed of the storm once it gets inland, because it's already going so fast as it makes landfall, does that just carry on?
Yeah, that just carries on because that's the atmospheric. I hate to use atmospheric river because that means something different in California, but it's the river of air that it's caught in that's propelling it forward. Now, we haven't really talked about it, and I don't want to leave here without talking about the Carolinas, because this could be a very bad hurricane in the Carolinas for a different reason. There's a cold front coming in here, and it's a healthy cold front. I mean, this whole weather pattern is much more like October than, in fact, we've never had a storm like this on the west coast of Florida this time of year. This is an October weather pattern completely, including a cold front. You combine the cold front with the higher elevations with the hurricane, that's a recipe for major, major flooding in the Carolinas, because you have that it goes uphill, right? You go from the low country up to the upstate, that's all uphill. So that just increases the rain. And now that water has to come downhill, conflicting with what storm surge comes in. So this is a high flood potential that everybody in the Carolinas just needs to be aware of.
And with that threat, it doesn't really matter exactly where the center tracks. If we have the center that moves off into the water, we still have that tropical moisture that's there, and it's more so of an orographic thing.
Conflicting with the front. So the front adds to the orography, or the orographic effect of the elevation, right? So it goes uphill, that drives the air up. The front is like a wedge, it drives the air up, that combination. And as a matter of fact, when you look at the rainfall forecast, now I haven't seen the new one, here it is right here, the newest update in the rainfall forecast, you see where the heaviest rain is. Look, it's here.
Right by the
it's
front.
On the other side because you've got that front pushing in.
Puts
right?
the squeeze on.
So it puts the squeeze on the rain, and then the rain falls uphill all runs downhill. And in places like Charleston, Georgetown, other places that have big rivers coming down, this is where you can have.
Which is no surprise that the governor of North Carolina has created a state of emergency. Brian, we're going to leave you for a few moments. We're going to get back into the field where we're awaiting, of course, what will eventually be on the coastline, and that is life-threatening storm surge. We're looking at dangerous hurricane force winds, the inland flooding we just discussed, all of this coming together. And more than 20 counties have already been ordered to leave evacuation zones in these low-lying areas because of the conditions that the storm will bring. Fox Weather's Robert Ray is live in Clearwater Beach awaiting Idalia. Robert?
Amy, mandatory evacuations underway here on Clearwater Beach in the flood zones A and B, barrier islands, and then low-lying areas. This beach, we are expecting up to 7 feet of storm surge off of the Gulf of Mexico because of the push of this rapid intensification. Now, people are readying, people trying to get off the beach, and I want to talk to these residents, Mark and Bridget Ferdinand, and I want to ask you guys live across the intercoastal on Clearwater. And for anyone who's not familiar with it, we're Clearwater Beach here, mandatory evac, Clearwater not evacuating. What are you expecting as someone who's lived here for quite a while?
We're expecting a lot of wind. We've been here over 20 years. We've seen a lot of hurricanes come through. Thank God we're not getting a direct hit from what they're forecasting. And we just do the preparation like anybody does. Make sure you've got water, everything in the house. Generator is a big time. Make sure that fires up and so forth.
Let me come over here so I can talk to Bridget. Bridget, are you at all concerned? I know you're not on the barrier island, but are you concerned with any kind of flooding damage that could come your way?
Well, we hope for the best always. The warm water has been a concern for us. So we're just hoping it stays minimal from what we're used.
I just got to pause for a second. Look at that Volkswagen in the background. That's like my dream vehicle. Look at the They Better Protect that. That's worth more than some of these fucking... No, but why is that out there? Look at that. I love that. That is beautiful. That's my dream to have one of those. Just had to point that out. Look at it. That's badass, though.
Used to. I guess we've ridden out a few.
How far are you into the intercoastal where your home is?
About 5 miles from where we're at.
Okay.
So that'd be right.
From here, we're 2 miles. From here, we're 5 miles. But we're right on the other side of the intercoastal. We're 2 miles from the water.
Okay.
Literally.
Is it a possibility that you could take surge in?
It'd been 100 years. It would take a big storm, but where we're at, we're pretty safe. We're kind of on one of the higher points on Pinellas side of west of 19.
Okay.
So we're technically not in the A evacuation zone.
Got it. Nerves at this point. What's the feeling? I see you come on over.
A little worry. We don't want to. We've always been successful riding it out, so we're just hoping for the best here. And
as the winds begin to kick up a little bit.
Yeah. The biggest thing is that obviously it's going to hit at night, so we probably won't get much sleep tonight. Just making sure we wake up in the morning with a roof over our head is the biggest thing.
No doubt. Yeah. Mark works at the airport. Amy, by the way, Tampa International. They closed at 12 o'clock last night. What can you tell me about that? Was it an easy process for everybody?
As far as I know, I've only been there for a few months, but my boss called me yesterday and told me the airport was closing at midnight. And obviously they got to get all the planes moved and everything off the tarmac because it is in a low-lying area over there, by Tampa Bay.
Guys, be safe. Thanks for talking to us live on Fox Weather. Appreciate both of you guys. Enjoy the fleeting moments, right?
Okay, thank you.
So thanks, guys. So, Amy, there you go. You hear it from some residents. They're on the inlet. They're not on the barrier island. Anyone on the barrier island, we hope, is getting out of Dodge soon. Getting a little bit of wind gusts here. I'm not saying that's not necessarily indicative of what's going on in the south, but it's all kind of coming together, unfortunately. Category 3 expected right off the coast here, middle of the night into tomorrow. Amy?
We are already starting to see some of those outer bands in Key West, so it won't be long as we look towards a landfall less than 24 hours away. Fox Weather's Robert Ray in Clearwater Beach. Fox Weather is with you as this storm inches closer. Intense waves already coming through the southernmost point of the U.S. Idalia expecting to make landfall in the Bend of Florida as a Category 3 storm. Here's a look at Hurricane Idalia's current position. You can actually get some live vantage points here from Key West. There's the buoy off the southern edge there, and there are the outer rain bands that are starting to impact Key West. And there are some that will brush up against the coastline. You'll see that rain on the southwestern coast of Florida here eminently. You can see those showers just offshore. Those are the outer bands of the storm. Right now, it's moving north at 14 miles per hour. Weather Command will be right back. Command. Kiana Lewis, I jumped the gun there, is with us. And Stephen Morgan, Amy Freeze here along with you as we continue to follow Idalia. And when we look at any hurricane, the most threatening part of the storm is surge. Right now, more than 20 counties have evacuated in Florida ahead of Hurricane Idalia's landfall because of the threatening surge. Storms like this Hurricane Ian last year, the most, the biggest, most impactful storm of the entire season. You see how the water is rushing from the ocean inland. This is what creates the threat. Now, in Fort Myers, it was a wall of water that swallowed the beach last September. It created just deadly consequences. Basically, the surge bulldozed buildings and entire communities. It happened so fast that people could not outrun it. They could not outswim it. They could not outdrive the surge. And tragically, 150 lives lost, most of them due to drowning in the surge. Every storm is different. Ian, of course, came ashore farther south than Idalia is forecast to do. But you got to stay alert. You have other hurricanes in history, Charlie, Ian, Irma, all turning just in time to create massive problems. So you can't always expect that you won't get something outside of the cone that will be impactful. Here's the latest in Idalia's peak storm surge. You can see this is up to 15 feet for the areas in purple, the Nature's Coast right there in the Big Bend. Outside of that, into Cedar Key southward to Spring Hill, you've got up to 11-foot surge, and through Tampa up to a 9-foot surge. This is problematic all the way down to basically a 3-foot surge that'll take us down to Duck Key and Key West. So the latest numbers coming in with the advisory show us these changes in surge, also show us a little bit of speed increase with the storm. Idalia's wind field is also pretty large for tropical storm force, but tightly wound for the hurricane impact right at shoreline. The other problematic situation here is we can have hurricane gusts well inland past the coastline, taking us up to the Florida-Georgia line, and that's reflective. And what we have is now some of the hurricane warnings. Also, what happens on the other side, once the storm tries to make its way out of the Atlantic, we really could have some serious problems in the Carolinas. Let's start with first things first. What do we know about landfall? We're less than 24 hours away.
Yeah, the landfall is going to be happening. And when we talk about that forward motion, that's going to add to the wind component, and that might also do something with the surge. I think it's of note that we've seen with that latest advisory, the storm surge threat now for the Nature Coast up to 15 feet. That's not going to have a huge impact on what we're seeing in Tampa. Tampa's still under that life-threatening surge, but the potential is there. Now, when we talk about the surge, these faster-moving storms, there is a silver lining. The faster they move, and if they remain more compact, then we're not going to have a huge surge like we saw with Hurricane Charlie back in 2004. But unfortunately, it looks like we have Idalia, which is going to have a significant wind field, and that is going to push up enough water as we have a shallow slope off the Nature Coast. We don't have that shelf in the Gulf of Mexico a couple of 100 miles out. So with that shallow beach, all that water is going to be pushed on into a coast that is real vulnerable to that surge.
The duration of the onshore push for Tampa could be the problematic scenario there. It doesn't need to make a landfall. If we have a long duration of the winds being pushed into the bay, once that gets underway, if it doesn't let up because it's still making its way northward and it's a very intense storm, you're going to have a long duration there where Tampa Bay gets its surge up to 7 feet. This is a situation where much of the coastline here has a variety of impacts. Kiana, when you look at this, what impacts do we see first and foremost? I mean, outside rain bands are already up to Key West.
That's exactly right. So we're starting to feel some of those outer bands, that being some heavy rain that's going to be pushing in, but certainly going to be the damaging winds. This is the start of feeling some of those winds. We also have to watch for maybe some other threats that are going to be on the table, one of which is going to be that tornado threat. When we have, a storm that's moving in, some of those outer bands as they approach the shoreline are going to be tapping into, an opportunity for wind shear, and that could lead to the tornado threat that we have at place. Remember, wind shear is the changing of the wind direction with height. So when we have that friction of the storm approaching land, again, coming off of the water, that's going to add to that threat of maybe some rotating storms tapping into the immediate coastline. Watching areas like Sarasota, Tampa, up into maybe even Gainesville could see some of those rotating storms as they approach the area. On top of that, we're going to be watching for areas that are going to be dealing with some of the outer rain bands, seeing higher winds as well. So wind gusts are going to be up upwards of 40, 50 miles per hour as early as tomorrow around noon. This could happen, guys, even before a landfall.
Yeah, it looks like we are going to have impacts widespread well ahead of the landfall. And then as you get closer to the center of the storm, the intensity ramps up. The center of Idalia is headed for the Big Bend of Florida. A small shift here on the track could put even more populated areas at risk. So we've been watching the swing in different directions. The National Hurricane Center forecasting a landfall somewhere between, north areas, Panama City, all the way far south to Tampa. We know we've closed in on a window there in the Big Bend, but direct landfall or not, we are looking at portions of the coastline having a variety of threats. Fox weather meteorologist Britta Merwin is in Tampa. Life-threatening storm surge is expected, and it's not just one piece of the coast that really is at risk.
Yeah, I mean, Amy, we'll see storm surge even down by the Florida Keys. Here in Tampa, it's particularly... morning. A lot of them are nervous about that. If it wasn't enough that we have a massive hurricane on the way that is going to throw storm surge into Tampa Bay, we have to look out for the tides. Amy, when I showed up here this morning, I think you guys have a photo that I grabbed, an amazing full moon. It's beautiful to look at, but it does add to the equation. We are going to have a huge astronomical high tide, and then surge will be on top of that. So it just adds insult to injury. We're going to have a surge problem. Now, I'm actually on a seawall. This is Old Tampa Bay, part of the Tampa Bay, system. And looking down at the water, I have about 3 feet of give here. So, 3 feet, and if we're talking about 7-foot storm surge, that's 4 feet of water on top of the seawall. That's up to here. A big reason of why I'm going to be leaving pretty shortly. So after our conversation, I'm hopping in the car and heading to Gainesville to talk about the inland impacts. And I want to point out these clouds over here. Amy, these are the outer rain bands. They're 60 miles offshore. Even this morning, I could see vibrant lightning off in the distance. I couldn't hear the rumbles of thunder. At that point, the rain bands were about 120 miles. But, just about 7 hours later, they're 60 miles offshore. So weather conditions are going to go down here quickly. I do want to point out this bridge right over here. That is the Howard Franklin Bridge. So that is what connects Tampa to St. Petersburg. Eventually, it will get shut down. We've seen a trickling of folks coming over the bridge, a little less action over the last hour. So hopefully people are heeding those warnings, getting out of the evacuation zone. I'm currently in zone B. There is a possibility that evacuation orders will be called for here as we are expecting a large storm surge. And that's what you evacuate for. You run from the water, hide from the wind. Classic setup here. And so we're going to run from the water, and we'll check in with you guys from Gainesville.
Yeah, you put the bridge there into the equation. That's really what leads to the airport as well. They've shut down operations at Tampa International. So a lot of people leaving with the evacuation zones, but other precautions taking place all around the bay so that everybody can stay safe. Fox Weather's Britta Merwin in Tampa. Thanks for your report. Idalia ejected into the Gulf. It's en route towards the Big Bend of Florida. And as the storm moves north, basically, it is going to be in this rapid strengthening phase, meaning it grows from a Category 1 to potentially a Category 3 storm before landfall. And that all happens within 24 hours. Tallahassee could face the brunt of Idalia with up to 8 inches of rain expected. Also, wicked winds as Tallahassee is located just 20 miles from the coastline. A lot of expectations here of what a westerly push for the cone would do. We also have our team coverage continuing with meteorologists and reporters across Florida and through the Southeast. Weather Command will be right back.
From your local emergency management officials, make sure you're doing what you need to do to keep yourself and your family safe. We have been working with the counties very closely over the past few days. At the state level, we've received more than 450 active mission requests that the state is coordinating, and those requests have either been fulfilled or will be fulfilled sometime during today. We have staged a lot of gasoline, 420,000 gallons worth of gasoline. Sometimes you get fuel interruptions, sometimes you don't. We're going to be prepared if there are fuel interruptions to be able to fill the gap. We have all 8 of our urban search and rescue teams activated, and that's close to 600 search and rescue personnel. We hope to not have to need those folks. We hope nobody ends up in distress once the storm hits. But if there is, we're going to have folks that are going to go out there. Kevin Guthrie already mentioned earlier today, a storm that's hitting late morning, early afternoon. You'll probably end up getting calls as we get into the evening hours. we're going to be doing rescues at night as well. That's typically not the way you want to do it. Because there's going to be down power lines, there's going to be certain hazards. It's going to make it more difficult for our personnel, but we are going to be there, and we're going to get the job done. We're already delivering things like water, MREs, and tarps to local communities. Shelters are being opened or have been opened and are continuing to be open all across Florida's Gulf Coast and in beyond. We are deploying the Starlink internet. Almost 250 of those devices have been deployed, and we have over 500 staged and ready to go as those are needed going forward in the future. So we want to just thank everybody who's a part of the power restoration efforts. We appreciate what our electric utilities from Duke and FPL and TECO, as well as our municipal electric outfits and the co-ops. Thank you for taking this seriously. Thanks for the preparation. And when you prepare and you're ready to go, you can make that, you can accomplish that mission. But this is likely going to be a storm that's going to leave an awful lot of debris. I think there's going to be a need to do a lot of road operations. You know, in Hurricane Ian, there really weren't as many of the cut and toss operations. There was some, but when you look at where this storm is going to hit, there's a lot of heavily wooded areas. So I think you're going to see a lot of these trees knocked down. You're going to see power lines knocked down, and it's just going to require a concerted effort. So what Duke is doing, what the other companies are doing is recognizing that this is a significant task, and it really will impact how we respond to this, how quickly we're able to get all this stuff back up and running. So I want to thank everyone who's been involved, and I can tell you the people of Florida really appreciate these linemen being out there. I can tell you after Hurricane Ian, it was like they'd see the folks racing into Fort Myers and these other areas, and they were very, very appreciative of all the hard work that was being done. This is not easy work, especially in late August in Florida. It's going to be nasty. It's going to be hot. There's going to be a lot of moving parts. And so this is really important work. The state of Florida very much appreciates everybody, particularly those who've come from out of state to help the people of Florida. And I know the Floridians very much appreciate it as well. So thank you, and God bless you. Okay, we're going to hear from Kevin Guthrie.
Thank you, Governor. And again, thank you for
Governor Ron DeSantis there with a lot of the power line and behind him, talking about the threats that Idalia is going to bring inland. When we take a weather forecast, basically a projection of what Idalia will do, and we look at what the potential power outage forecast is, look at this widespread area. A couple of things that he talked about there live from Wildwood, where he's located here with, by the way, Kevin Guthrie is the Office of Emergency Management who followed him. But he made a couple of really important points. One, he said, I think there are going to be a lot of power outages, and talked about trees. Perry is an area that has a lot of pine trees. Those would create breakage, and they would create blocked off roads as well as power lines down. He also talked about potentially seeing other trees come down. There's a lot of oak trees up in Tallahassee. Those are two areas to watch. And you've got a huge area here, Stephen, of the nature zone, basically the nature coast.
Trees. I think that's going to be something that we talk a lot more about. The pine trees of note too, whenever you get winds, and keep in mind, when we look at these winds in the forecast, 125 miles, that's at the surface. You work up in this hurricane, those winds are going to be stronger. And even depending on where these trees are at, they cannot take the force of these winds. Pine trees are not palm trees. Palm trees can handle it, pine trees cannot. But the overall forecast and concerns we have with this remain exactly as we would expect. This rapidly intensifying storm, we do not want to sleep on where it will make that exact landfall, because it's the core of this storm that's going to carry potentially catastrophic consequences.
When you look at what's happening right now, those outer rain bands already starting to make their way up against the coastline. We've been watching that radar pretty carefully. Some of these storms, Kiana, are going to be fierce. I mean, there is a tornado threat with the outer bands well before landfall tomorrow morning.
And that's exactly right. And remember, a lot of this is happening pre-dawn. So we want you to be very mindful of that. Storms are going to be rolling through as early as later today and into tonight. You're looking at a live look over Naples. That's where we have one of the outer bands.
That's an outer band
approaching parts of Florida. So we're starting to feel those impacts. I think even this camera lens is lightening up a little bit, so probably some lightning off in the distance there as well. But these towering storms are pushing on shore, and as they do so, there's going to be some friction between the Gulf of Mexico and on land, that coastline of Florida. That's what's going to add to that threat for tornadoes as we head into the bulk of this storm.
I mean, when you look at the anatomy of a hurricane, this is classic textbook, where you see the outer bands and the large circulation that can be on the well on the outskirts of the center of the storm and the eye. So this is hundreds of miles from the center of the storm, where you see the outer bands start to form, and that is what really helps to intensify the center of the storm, and also can make it very dangerous for people who are trying to evacuate. So when you think about Florida getting ready, you don't want to wait until landfall to get ready. In fact, right now is the time to prepare. You know, the key takeaway from a lot of this preparation is that there's not much time left. You see these outer bands coming in. You don't want to be trying to evacuate when there are storms underway. And that's exactly what we've got going on with the outer band there from Naples trying to make its way onshore.
There's nothing that we're really watching that's rotating. I think putting back on reflectivity, I mean, Naples is this perspective. So what we're looking at out to the west, and I find this fascinating because covering hurricanes, when you get one of these outer rain bands to move in, you would think naturally, oh, it's really going to cool things off. Aside from maybe what the rain would provide, the rain-cooled air, this is still going to be a warm and muggy system. This is a classic tropical system that despite the rain moving through, things are not going to feel comfortable. It's going to get more muggy. And we're going to continue to see even more rain move in. I mean, to watch these outer rain bands and actually getting a first look, we've got a nasty one right now moving through the Keys.
Yeah, let's, well, as we're watching this Key West, you might want to pull up that southernmost buoy again if we've still got that on the dock, because that'll show us. We have Key West High School from our WeatherStem camera network there, and you can see where we've got basically the approach of the storm on one side, and then it gives you from Duck Key, the other side of the storm, and there's your buoy right off Key West, getting slammed with waves, wind, and rain all coming down. You can see right there off to the left of the camera the push and the pull of the palm tree leaves.
What we have,
well.
yeah, and what we have going on right now is just that classic rapid intensification. I know it's technically not been achieved yet, but the National Hurricane Center talking about it, and with these winds, I think the highest wind gust that we have seen so far was about 51 miles an hour. One of the buoys here for 2026 is now gusting upwards of 49 miles an hour, but these winds are going to systematically increase with now from impacts to land, hurricane warnings farther inland to include that Florida-Georgia line.
So nasty weather in advance of Idalia, the hurricane. Right now, a Category 1 storm projected to make landfall as a Category 3. One of the major changes within the last hour has been the hurricane warning coverage increase, which takes it over the Florida-Georgia line. The reason that there's a hurricane warning right now, this is all about the wind speed potential.
It is, and when we have a fast-moving storm, you think of something. If this was going to stall out, we would quickly see this hurricane lose its steam, lose its energy because it's over land and it's beginning to decay and weaken. But based on the forward motion of this tonight, look at where it's at. Tomorrow morning, look at where it's at. It is going to move very quickly. And with that 15 to 20 mile per hour forward motion, that's going to allow those hurricane force winds to spread farther inland. And then as it moves into the Carolinas, we'll still see significant gusts and heavy rain.
And we'll be tracking the storm beyond inland because the Carolina coasts are also in on it.
And that's exactly right. We have flood watches that are in place. Once we head up towards, say, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, it's going to be the rain and the flooding aspect that's going to be more so of a concern for these areas. Winds will still be a concern, but I think we flip the switch, I should say, and look at some of the heavier rain that's going to be pouring in. We have some of our highest totals exiting out of the panhandle of Florida, moving into the Carolinas as well as Georgia. And we talked to Brian Norcross earlier. He kind of gave us an idea of why this is happening, that orographic lift, as we have a cold front sliding in from the north and Idalia moving in from the south is going to offer up more rain across the southeast. So we have to watch for those areas like Savannah, Charleston, that are going to be under the threat for some of the heaviest rain and flooding as a result.
Flood watch is up. It takes us through well into Wednesday as the storm will create more impacts for the Carolina coastline. Inside Weather Command, we go to the top of the office and the ribbon of cameras with information on display. Hurricane Idalia arrives in Florida less than 24 hours from now. That is the basically Key West Southern Point buoy where you see the waves splashing up and rain coming down. We already have the outer bands of the storm making their way into Florida right up against the coastline. Alerts are up. Mandatory evacuations have been ordered. So already people are preparing for this storm. And really, if you haven't in a Zone A evacuation ordered place, you need to do it now. Get out of town. We're following this storm from the approach of landfall. We've got our team there on the board, meteorologists and reporters fanned out across Florida. Weather Command will be right back. Back to Weather Command, looking at a weather stem camera here from Fort Myers. You can see the outer bands just offshore from Idalia. This is a very large storm, and we do see spiraling bands outflowing from this storm, and you could see thunderstorms producing severe weather. I mean, really, it's underway for some places, Key West all the way up through Venice. So be aware of the storms that could come in advance of the hurricane. I mean, the first nasty squalls are just moving on shore right now. We've been looking at some of this. That's Tampa, St. Pete, already getting some downpours. Look at Cape Coral. This is a dark, dark sky. And the outer rain bands can sometimes be exceptionally fierce, not to mention they could spin up a waterspout or a tornado.
Yeah, that actually looks like we have it as a heightened threat today for this part of the peninsula of Florida. Cape Coral, it's the first round, but there is more off into the Gulf of Mexico. And keep in mind, these rain bands, too, can produce some wind gusts that are close to tropical storm force. I mean, it's certainly a possibility there, but it's that tropical rain as these bands move on through, a blinding rain that reduces the visibility.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons not to wait. Go ahead, take your actions now. You don't want to get caught in showers and storms just because you waited too long. Let's go into Tampa because MacDill Air Force Base, which is just about 4 miles south of downtown Tampa, basically smack dab in the storm surge prone zone. You have a forecast for Tampa Bay to get a surge of 7 to 9 feet. Tampa Bay on one side, Hillsborough Bay on the other side. And parts of this peninsula, it could end up underwater. When you look at this peninsula, you've got MacDill Base right here, and they have got to evacuate. They're in the process of doing that right now, taking personnel and aircraft out of this Air Force base to prepare for hurricane conditions. We're joined right now by Commander of the 6th Air Refueling Wing, Colonel Adam Bingham of the U.S. Air Force. First of all, thank you for your service to our country.
Amy, thanks for having me join. I think it's a really important topic. As a fellow Utahn, it's great to be able to talk about things that are going on in Florida. I think the next 24 to 36 hours will prove to be really important for this state.
What does it take to evacuate the base like this? It sounds like a big operation.
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot. And the reality is that, I don't do this alone. There's over 20,000 people that work on this installation. We've got 35 mission partners, to include 2 combatant commanders of the 9 that happen to be around the world with U.S. Central Command as well as U.S. Special Operations Command. We get a lot of help. There's a lot of great leaders here on the yard, and we just go through a very methodical process in making sure that we evacuate those 24 KC-135s, as well as over 20,000 individuals and their families.
Wow, 20,000 personnel has got to be taken out. Does anybody stay behind, ride it out on the base, or does everybody and everything have to go?
Yeah, because the Air Force Base is in Zone Alpha, Zone A for Hillsborough County. Once we make the decision to evacuate Zone A, it does close the installation, and so we'll have a continuity of operations site just to the north of here at Raymond James Stadium, where we'll go and camp out, and we'll run operations from there. And on that note, I really want to thank the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for being gracious hosts during a very critical time for us to make sure that we remain ready to get after our nation's business. So really hats off to the Bucs for helping us and letting us do that.
Well, we know that they're very important in making this happen. We remember that you had to evacuate during Ian. It's a difficult circumstance to be in, but one that you do in a fashion that's commendable and will allow us to get right back on track after the storm passes. Thank you so much for your time, Commander of the 6th Air Refueling Wing, Colonel Adam Bingham. Thanks for being on Fox Weather.
Thank you, Amy. Have a great day, Amy. Thank you.
A tornado warning right now for Collier County. This is exactly what we were anticipating happening just moments ago, Stephen, talking about the potential for a tornado to happen. And here we go with a warning.
It's the first one of the day. This is moving off at about 40 to 45 miles an hour. And it's warned because there's a potential water spout, but it's approaching Marco Island. It's south of I-75. It's south of Naples. You can see where Fort Myers is located. This entire rain band, though, imagine it spiraling around an area of low pressure, though. And with this perhaps embedded water spout, if that moves over land, if it moves over Marco Island, where people live, we've got tropical storm warnings there, it could produce a tornado or land spout.
Yeah, this is one of the risks that come along with the outer band, sort of the start. Even after the storm makes its way inland tomorrow, there'll still be a severe weather threat, Kiana.
And that's exactly right. We are looking at a level 2 out of 5 for that severe weather threat into tomorrow. And we also have that possibility for tornadoes. Already seeing a warning up on your screen here. The tornadoes comes, as you know, that air is spinning and it's being wrapped up in the updraft of thunderstorms. So we will have this threat in the outer bands as we head through not only today, but tomorrow as well. And it could even come before, Idalia makes that landfall. So a couple of impacts being felt before the main storm makes its approach on land.
17,000 people in the tornado warning. You see it reaches about East Naples at about 12:17 Eastern time. So you've got maybe 10, 15 minutes here before the storm is on top of you. But right now, if you're in this zone, the tornado warning area, you want to go ahead and take cover and prepare for a storm that's coming through that will have an impact. All eyes on Idalia. Beyond the strength of this storm, there are also concerns over the letter I. Some myths do revolve around this spot in the alphabet. There's a belief that all I storms are very ferocious. And if you consider this storm only gets retired when it has this historical significance of destructive impacts, well, okay, the reputation actually is based in some fact because almost 15% of retired storms beginning with the letter I, more than any other letter in the alphabet, that is the letter that gets retired. In reality, though, it is less about the letter itself, a little more about timing. Let's dive into this. When you look at when I storms occur, the most recent example can take us to Hurricane Ian. It was a deadly Category 5 storm, made landfall end of September. Tragically, Ian led to the deaths of at least 150 people, mostly due to surge. It caused more than $110 billion in damage, and it was retired. You look back at storms that have been retired with the letter I, and we have 13 of them. Some of those have actually impacted Florida. Retired ice storms to hit the state: Irma, Inez, and Ivan, 2004, 20 years ago. You look at these storms, a lot of them left a mark to be remembered, which is why they were retired. We look at, Stephen, going back in history, several storms. The ones that stand out, though, a lot of them have to do with the letter I, when you just do a quick recall.
Yeah, it's not just Florida. It's, as we were looking at, it was Texas, Hurricane Ike. It was at one point a Category 4 hurricane. It was also devastating to other parts in the Caribbean. But when we had that landfall in the United States, it was the Bolivar Peninsula, Galveston, a storm surge of 15 to 20 foot above normal tide. That's what this storm will be known as. Now, the wind field was significant. And I think it's important to talk about this because the storm surge and the threat is very much a function of how big the storm is. Right now, we have Idalia with winds extending from the center about 150, 160 miles an hour. From the center with Ike, we were well over 220 miles. That was the radius of those winds. When you have a wind field producing tropical storm force like that, it is certain to provide a huge storm surge, and that's what we saw. It claimed 10 lives in the United States alone, and it was a $1 billion disaster.
Also a Gulf storm. Also a Gulf storm. So you look at the scenario.
Labor Day, this
the
timing,
yes, is very similar. You have a very warm Gulf. The characteristics of the storm might end up different, but the letter I typically falls in this time zone. And so that's why a lot of these storms, with the start of the name with an I, turn out to be retired storms. They're happening in the heat of the season.
I think what's also eerie is when you go back 2 years ago, you had Hurricane Ida, which unfortunately slammed Louisiana as a Category 4 storm and had max winds of 150 miles per hour. And it's estimated that more than 100 people died, and it toppled about $75 billion in estimated damage. There were some reports here, Amy, that there was a ship that was over in the port of Foshan, I should say, and they reported max winds of 190 miles per hour. Now, that was unofficial. So the official report was 150 miles per hour. But that just really shows you, just how, strong this is. But, again, I think the anniversary, August 29th, which is today. And now we're talking about another ice storm knocking on the door.
Right. This is both, I think, the myth and the reality of the I storm is when you move into this part of the alphabet, we're typically reaching into both the calendar halfway point of September 1st. We're also reaching into the peak of the season, which is traditionally September 10th. When you look at the climate data over a long period of time, we're only 10 days outside of that. And so sometimes we get into the peak right as we're moving into this portion of the alphabet. So as you remember the name Idalia and that letter I, remember some of the storms historically that have left a mark. Fox Weather is your hurricane HQ. Idalia expected to undergo rapid intensification. It's happening now, and by definition, the criteria means that we could see an increase of 35-mile-an-hour winds or greater in a 24-hour period. We expect that. Out in the open Gulf, the shear has lessened. The waters have warmed, leaving really nothing to prevent a Category 3 hurricane before we get to landfall. Fox Weather has team coverage, including meteorologists and reporters both live on the ground from the Gulf Coast of Florida all the way to Georgia. We will see this storm even as it exits the Atlantic coastline. We're with you throughout the storm. Weather Command is your live on the ground from the Gulf Coast of Florida all the way to Georgia. We will see this storm even as it exits the
hoping for the best. You know, we do this each time that we leave every single time, but this one looks like it's a biggie.
You do not have to leave the state. You don't have to drive hundreds of miles. You have to get to higher ground in a safe structure. You can ride the storm out there.
Can't make y'all leave, but I suggest you do.
We are hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. Right now on Fox Weather, Hurricane Idalia rapidly intensifying as it nears the Floridian coast. The impact already being felt right here in Key West, Florida. You are looking at that live as those massive waves crash over the wall there. This is a dangerous situation that unfortunately, Kiana, is only going to get worse as it approaches the U.S. mainland.
That's right. Life-threatening weather arriving in less than 24 hours, and the time to be prepared and evacuate is quickly running out. Almost 5 million people are in the path of the cone, with millions more facing dangerous storm surge.
Yeah, Fox Weather has full team coverage the entire day, and of course through landfall, which we're expecting tomorrow. We'll be here with you every step of the way before, during, and after the storm. Thank you so much for making us a part of your Tuesday, your 29th day of August. I'm Michael Esteman.
And I'm Kiana Lewis. Michael, we have a lot to talk about today. Hurricane Idalia already starting to feel some of those outer impacts with the outer bands, you know, brushing up against Florida and bringing in not only showers, but we had a tornado warning earlier today as well.
Yeah, just moments ago, that was heading in the direction of Marco Island. And some of those outer bands, we got to watch for the twisting and turning. Some of those outer bands, we were looking at what the length of that looked like. It's over 500 miles long in spots. So again, a lot that we're going to continue to track. We want to bring in, of course, Fox Weather's hurricane specialist Brian Norcross here to break everything down. And, Brian, we're looking at Idalia. It is set to become the first major hurricane to strike this season. What are you most concerned about as you look into the dynamics of the storm?
Well, I'm concerned about the storm surge. Storm surge is the deadly part of hurricanes, as we saw, unfortunately, last year with Hurricane Ian. The Gulf Coast of the United States is one of the most vulnerable places in the whole world for storm surge. In other words, the Gulf Coast amplifies the storm surge. Here is the latest advisory. As of 11 a.m., you see 85-mile-an-hour winds moving north at 14, so it is steadily picking up forward speed. That's expected to continue so that it's up near 20 miles per hour by the time it gets to landfall. And there's the pressure at 976 millibars. That continues to fall. The lower the pressure, the more energy there is in the storm. Generally, the winds go up. On the buoys and reports around the coast, you see some pretty good gusts here, Michael, up to 50 miles an hour already. But it's all about the outer bands. We talked about this yesterday, and I was concerned about this. And look how active these outer bands are in terms of lightning.
Wow.
That really tells you the story of just how much energy there is in those outer bands there. And here's like one just coming in on Key West right now. It looks very intense, although they don't have a warning up for that one. And here the one up by Marco Island, they have that tornado warning in effect there. So the issue is that we have the winds coming around the hurricane going like this. The winds in the upper atmosphere are coming like this.
Twisting and turning. They're almost perpendicular to one another. Again, just meaning that we're tapping into some of that rotation. My question for you, looking at this, we were just looking at Fort Myers toward Fort Myers Beach. Obviously, with what happened last year with Hurricane Ian, what's the concern on that potential for perhaps some storm surge and some flooding and rain in places like Fort Myers and Fort Myers Beach?
Well, Fort Myers Beach, when the hurricane, so right now, look at the direction of the wind.
Yeah.
It's like this. So there's no issue because the wind is coming off the land. It's pushing the water out, right?
Good.
But you can imagine that once the storm gets up here, now the wind is coming this way. So now we're pushing water in here. But the thing is, it's not it's not the strongest wind, right? The strongest wind is closer into the storm. So that's why they put a maximum of 4 feet there. That's nothing. 4 feet above normal high tide is quite a bit. That's the maximum. And if it comes in a little less than that, but storm surge is going to occur on the entire coast of Florida. There's no getting away from it. If you're south of the hurricane, you're getting storm surge.
Saying before that, really the big concern for you is going to be Tampa Bay, Old Tampa Bay, and over toward that region too, where storm surge could be a huge issue.
Well, it's going to be a bigger issue because it's closer to the center of the storm. So there's more energy coming in this way. The biggest storm surge is going to be up here in the Nature Coast. It looks like, assuming the storm, if the storm were to go on the edge of the cone like this, then Tampa would get near maximum storm surge. If it stays up in here somewhere, then the Nature Coast gets the maximum storm surge. But still, there is going to be storm surge on the entire coast of the state. And I want to mention that the current forecast is 125 miles per hour, more or less, at landfall. So if they're forecasting 125, you get ready for 135. So you get ready for a Category 4, right?
Oh, wow. Okay. That totally makes sense. I know that you're going to be with us every step of the way through this. Brian, thank you so much. Kiana, a lot that we're watching here.
That's exactly right. And we do brushing up against Florida and bringing in not only showers, but we had a tornado warning earlier today as well.
Yeah, just moments ago, that was heading in the direction of Marco Island. And some of those outer bands, we got to watch for the twisting and turning. Some of those outer bands, we were looking at what the length of that looked like. It's over 500 miles long in spots. So again, a lot that we're going to continue to track. We want to bring in, of course, Fox Weather's hurricane specialist, Brian Norcross, here to break everything down. And, you know, Brian, we're looking at Idalia. It is set to become the first major hurricane to strike this season. What are you most concerned about as you look into the dynamics of the storm?
Well, I'm concerned about the storm surge. Storm surge is the deadly part of hurricanes, as we saw, unfortunately, last year with Hurricane Ian. The Gulf Coast of the United States is one of the most vulnerable places in the whole world for storm surge. In other words, the Gulf Coast amplifies the storm surge. Here is the latest advisory. As of 11 a.m., you see 85-mile-an-hour winds moving north at 14, so it is steadily picking up forward speed. That's expected to continue so that it's up near 20 miles per hour by the time it gets to landfall. And there's the pressure at 976 millibars. That continues to fall. The lower the pressure, the more energy there is in the storm. Generally, the winds go up. On the buoys and reports around the coast, you see some pretty good gusts here, Michael, up to 50 miles an hour already. But it's all about the outer bands. We talked about this yesterday, and I was concerned about this. And look how active these outer bands are in terms of lightning.
Wow.
That really tells you the story of just how much energy there is in those outer bands there. And here's like one just coming in on Key West right now. It looks very intense, although they don't have a warning up for that one. And here the one up by Marco Island, they have that tornado warning in effect there. So the issue is that we have the winds coming around the hurricane going like this. The winds in the upper atmosphere are coming like this.
Twisting and turning. They're almost perpendicular to one another. Again, just meaning that we're tapping into some of that rotation. My question for you, looking at this, we were just looking at Fort Myers toward Fort Myers Beach. Obviously, with what happened last year with Hurricane Ian, what's the concern on that potential for perhaps some storm surge and some flooding and rain in places like Fort Myers and Fort Myers Beach?
Well, Fort Myers Beach, when the hurricane, so right now, look at the direction of the wind.
Yeah.
It's like this. So there's no issue because the wind is coming off the land. It's pushing the water out, right?
Good.
But you can imagine that once the storm gets up here, now the wind is coming this way. So now we're pushing water in here. But the thing is, it's not it's not the strongest wind, right? The strongest wind is closer into the storm. So that's why they put a maximum of 4 feet there. That's nothing. 4 feet above normal high tide is quite a bit. That's the maximum. And if it comes in less than that, but storm surge is going to occur on the entire coast of Florida. There's no getting away from it. If you're south of the hurricane, you're getting storm surge.
You were saying before that really the big concern for you is going to be Tampa Bay, old Tampa Bay, and over toward that region too, where storm surge could be a huge issue.
Well, it's going to be a bigger issue because it's closer to the center of the storm. So there's more energy coming in this way. The biggest storm surge is going to be up here in the Nature Coast, it looks like. Assuming that the storm, if the storm were to go on the edge of the cone like this, then Tampa would get near maximum storm surge. If it stays up in here somewhere, then the Nature Coast gets the maximum storm surge. But still, there is going to be storm surge on the entire coast of the state. And I want to mention that the current forecast is 125 miles per hour, more or less, at landfall. So if they're forecasting 125, you get ready for 135. You get ready for a Category 4, right?
Oh, wow. Okay. That totally makes sense. I know that you're going to be with us every step of the way through this. Brian, thank you so much. Kiana, a lot that we're watching here.
That's exactly right. And we do have Tampa Bay on the top of our minds, so we're going to head to the Tampa Bay area. It has not had a direct landfall hurricane since 1950. However, it is home to a coastline that is very vulnerable to storm surge. Fox Weather's meteorologist Britta Merwin joins us now from Tampa as a life-threatening storm surge is going to be expected there. We're starting to see the winds pick up here in your live shot, Britta. How are folks responding as the storms are approaching the coastline?
Kiana, we've had a couple residents come up to us this morning, kind of expressing that they're feeling a little nervous this go around. I spoke to one gentleman live on Fox Weather First. His name's Sam. He's a lifelong Tampa Bay resident, and he feels like they have gotten very lucky. And I would agree with him. I mean, there's been a couple close calls. Of course, they've had scary moments, but we haven't seen a peak storm surge setup in a really long time. And you do not have to have a direct landfall to have the worst experience of your life when it comes to hurricanes. And when you look at the Tampa Bay area, the positioning of having landfall around the Big Bend is worst case scenario for Tampa Bay. That means on the dirty side of the storm, we have the optimal fetch. That's the distance that the winds have to carry over the Gulf of Mexico. And Tampa Bay itself, on average, is only 12 feet deep. That's a lot of water. It's a short depth, and that's part of the problem because it's a lot of water that has to move through a very shallow depth, which means it's all going to end up here. So this is old Tampa Bay. I'm on the seawall right now. Kiana, Michael, just looking down. I have about 3 feet of give. So if we got worst case scenario in this location, that would mean about 4 feet over the seawall. That's water here. I mean, that means that the homes that are to my side are going to be inundated. So we'll have to see how things unfold. I'll let you know I'm not going to be here. After our conversation, I'm hopping on the road and heading towards Gainesville to give everyone an idea of the inland impacts, because it's going to be far stretching for the Sunshine State. I do want to point out the clouds over here. You see how it looks a little darker? That's actually the outer rain bands. And when I showed up this morning about 8 hours ago, before the sun was even up, they were about 120 miles offshore. I saw the lightning off in the distance, didn't hear the rumbles because, of course, really far away. But now those outer rain bands are 60 miles away. They're getting closer. The winds are picking up, as you can see, and eventually the winds will be so strong that they have to shut down the bridges. That is the closest bridge that I am located to. That's the Howard Franklin Bridge. It connects Tampa to St. Petersburg. And once the winds are over, 45, 50 miles per hour, they're going to have to shut it down. Mandatory evacuations are out for Zone A. That is what you're looking at. This is Zone B. And a lot of residents that we spoke to this morning, they're preparing to leave in case they are asked to leave. We did have local officials, a couple of police officers came up, introduced themselves, said hello. They were concerned about our location here. They were happy to hear that we're going to pack things up and head to another spot.
I'm happy to hear that as well, Britta. I know you got a lot on your hands out there, just now getting into the start of what could be Idalia across the Tampa Bay area. We'll keep a close eye on you and check in with you throughout this latter half of the afternoon. And we head over towards another area here that's going to be impacted, Cedar Key, Florida, getting prepared as Hurricane Idalia approaches. You're under a hurricane warning and right in the potential path for this storm. So we're heading into that preparation mode across the state of Florida. Rightfully so. We're looking at the storm that's going to be moving into the area, already doing so with its outer bands. And we do have a complex setup. We talked to Brian Norcross earlier today, and he let us know that this is typically a setup that will be later into the season, say October, rather than being the latter half of August. But here's how things are going to pan out. We do have Idalia that's going to continue to drive across the state of Florida, approaching a cold front that's going to be moving in from the north. It's also going to be associating with an area of high pressure and its winds coming in from the south. So it's a bit of a squeeze when it comes to the moisture that's going to be in place throughout this upcoming week. Taking us through Wednesday after the landfall and into Thursday, we have impacts across parts of Georgia as well as South Carolina and into North Carolina. Looking at the forecast cone, again, we will still have that opportunity and even room for further development, rapid intensification all the way up to about landfall into tomorrow. We could see winds get as high as 125 miles per hour. We are going to likely see a major category storm. And if we get any, beyond that 125 mile per hour category, we could even see upwards to a category 4 storm. So we're just about 5 miles per hour off of that. Have to really watch this closely. Prepare for a category 4, even though we're still looking at the opportunity of a category 3 storm. Rapid intensification is already underway. We see our eye wall really trying to get itself together and get organized. We've seen that already within the past couple of hours. And if we continue with this and on this trend over these warm sea surface temperatures with an opportunity for low wind shear, we are going to undergo another round of rapid intensification. So Michael, as we go through later today into tonight and eventually into tomorrow with our landfall, there is still room and opportunity for further strengthening.
Yeah, the next 12 to 24 hours are going to be imperative that you are with us every step of the way right here on Fox Weather. And I want you to look at your screen. This is the view currently in Key West, Florida. And I'll say this to you, over the past couple of hours, we've actually seen people basically risking their life to try to get photos at this specific point in Key West. Obviously super dangerous. It is not what you want to be doing. Why? Because storm surge is the most lethal part of any tropical system, especially when we're talking about a hurricane. So kind of a preview of what not to do and get so close to the water like that when we're talking about huge waves kind of enveloping the area. If there's any little bit of good news, it looks like that tornado warning has been allowed to expire. Otherwise, let's focus in on Tampa, St. Pete, where we're expecting 3 to 5 inches of rain. Winds super gusty, at times over 50 miles per hour with a storm surge, especially right there in Tampa Bay, upwards of 7 feet above high tide. We have a supermoon that's going to be taking place tomorrow. What's that mean? We then have what's called a king tide. So when are the tide cycles? Of course, we have one at around 4 a.m., but more specifically, as this begins to move in, around the 1:50 to 2 o'clock hour is when you can expect the highest of that storm surge. And again, look at those winds by the time we get to late tomorrow morning, upwards of 40 to 45 mile per hour wind gusts, again, thrusting all of that moisture and pushing all of that water into Tampa Bay. So places like Old Tampa Bay, by 1 a.m., expecting winds upwards of 50 to 60 miles per hour. Look at the wind direction from the southeast, St. Petersburg, that's 50 to 60. Again, all of that water is getting thrown and pushed up into Hillsborough Bay as well. So crossing the Sunshine Highway Bridge or Skyway Bridge, I wouldn't be surprised if some of those bridges are shut down. This is 275 right here. You have the Courtney Campbell Causeway. I wouldn't be surprised if Florida Department of Transportation were to close a few of those bridges, just given the strength of the wind. And again, because of that, I think it'll be kind of a dangerous go of things through early tomorrow morning before things begin to wind down on your Wednesday evening. Well, evacuation orders are already underway up in Florida's Gulf Coast. What you need to know as Hurricane Idalia approaches, you're watching Fox Weather, your Hurricane HQ. has an ominous feeling about it.
A little concern. It's coming fast. We don't have the typical week or week and a half prepared time. So today we're scrambling a little.
I would rather tell them tomorrow, the next day, I'm sorry you evacuated for a day, but you're safe, you're alive, than having someone having to go to their funeral because they waited, they can't get out.
Yeah, boy, you can hear the words of, the words of action and the call to action from so many. Thank you so much for sticking with us right here on Fox Weather as we continue to track Hurricane Idalia. I'm Michael Esteman.
And I'm Kiana Lewis. And Michael, the danger is rising in Florida because of Hurricane Idalia. As it approaches, we already have our outer bands brushing up against the southwest coastline in areas like Key West. And we're seeing and feeling those first impacts right now. We're still a couple of hours away from a potential landfall.
Absolutely. We have FDOT, that's the Florida Department of Transportation, that's actually suspended tolls, thank goodness, just allowing folks to jump on the road without worrying about paying tolls just so that they can evacuate. We have 5,000 Florida National Guard members that are on standby as well. Let's get you the very latest from what we're learning. Storm surge already arriving in places like Key West, Florida. Now, on the left side of your screen, you're looking at Tampa, St. Pete area. And again, Tampa Bay, by the way, hasn't had a direct landfall hurricane since 1950. It has been quite a bit of time. We were just speaking with our hurricane expert, Brian Norcross, saying that Tampa Bay, he's very concerned about Tampa Bay, as am I. I think that just the way in which it's positioned, the way in which the geography and the wind are all going to meet up could lead to a real big flood threat and a serious cause for concerns as Floridians along the Gulf Coast prepare for what could be a direct hit from possibly a Category 3 major hurricane. Here's what we have going on right now as we speak. You can see the track taking this into, say, the Big Bend of Florida. Here's where Apalachicola is. Here's where Cedar Key is on the right. Notice those winds by Wednesday morning. That's 125 miles per hour. And as Brian Norcross was saying, we always prepare for winds at least 10 miles per hour up and over that 125 mile per hour threshold. So prepare for perhaps a low end Category 4 storm. That is what we'll be dealing with. If you look closely right here, that little bullseye of red, that is hurricane force winds. Those are winds over 75 miles per hour. And that's exactly what we're expecting for friends and family in Cedar Key. So it's going to be really important that as Idalia makes landfall, that you prepare for that. And notice the trajectory of this takes it into parts of the Florida-Georgia line. So even places like Tallahassee need to be on guard for it. We have storm surge warnings. Again, you can see it right here, really in that elbow region, if you will. And again, the reason why is because as the winds force all of that water up against the shoreline, unfortunately, what that's going to mean is some inland flooding. We're talking about storm surge up and over 10 to 11 feet. That's going to be on top of our high tide cycle. And you can see with the newest update and the newest guidance is now suggesting that we could be talking about upwards of 15 feet of storm surge. To put that into perspective for you, typically a one-story house or one-story building is about 10 feet, and then 2 stories is about 20 feet. So we're talking about at least 1.5 stories. It is a literal wall of water that we're talking about from Perry toward Horseshoe Beach, friends in Cedar Key. You'll need to really watch out because, again, this could be very dangerous in the hours to come. And we're also learning that 3.1 million Americans are in Idalia's cone. More than 20 Florida counties already ordering evacuations as the coast prepares for this intense storm surge. Fox Weather's Brandy Campbell joins us from Tallahassee, the state capital. Let me know, Brandy, how is the state capital and how are those in the community preparing?
Well, right now we're under the care of all of the representatives here at the Emergency Operations Center, where they are working around the clock throughout landfall to make sure Florida is ready for Idalia. Now, most recently, DeSantis, he actually expanded his state of emergency declaration from 46 counties to 49. Idalia is set to make landfall along Florida's Big Bend region. DeSantis noted if it hits during the Wednesday morning high tide, some places could get 8 to 12 feet of water in storm surge, and anyone staying is putting their lives in jeopardy. Meanwhile, over 20 counties have evacuation orders listed. Almost half of those are mandatory. DeSantis announced people evacuating from these impacted areas on Florida's west coast will not have to pay tolls for the next 7 days, and that is for counties where Tampa is located, as well as north of that area.
Everybody on that Gulf Coast from Tampa Bay up until Northwest Florida must remain vigilant. They have nudged the track a little bit further west over the last 24 hours.
People are going to experience issues with this, from trees down, power being shut down, heavy rains are on the east side of this storm. It's going to be a very fast-moving storm, but please, if you're in the red, don't focus on that cone. Focus on if you're in the red, you need to take some type of protective action, and you need to do that now.
All right, and teams here at the EOC have been busy getting assets ready for the response after Idalia as well. 25,000 linemen stationed with more on the way. There are 55,000 Florida National Guardsmen activated, 8 urban search and rescue teams with over 580 personnel on their team, and hundreds of Starlink devices deployed or ready to go after the storm. I'll be here from the EOC keeping up with all of the movements, I should say, as we await for Idalia. Back to you.
Randy, you know, we learned so much from Hurricane Ian last year, the preparations before, during, and of course after. I know that you'll keep us updated every step of the way as we continue our coverage. Brandy Campbell for us live in the state capital of Florida, Tallahassee. Brandy, thank you. Kiana?
All right, and we're going to head over towards Key West. That's where we're seeing some of the storm surge that's going to continue to rise. We're already seeing some of our outer bands being impacted in the area. Looking at the most southernmost point of Key West, a few folks still out and about, but these waves are crashing in at this point in time. And I'm told that authorities, when this becomes a little too wild, will cut this off to the public as well. We look over towards some of our alerts that are in place. So we have, again, storm surge warnings from Apalachicola all the way down through Fort Myers. And then we also have some storm surge watches from Fort Myers on south and heading up into Georgia as well. This is going to be a zone, the southwest coast of Florida, that really gets in on the bulk of the storm surge. We are looking at several areas that are going to see several feet of storm surge, depending on where Idalia impacts you the most. Looking up towards Georgia as it exits back out towards the coastline into parts of the Atlantic, we're also going to see storm surge from Georgia into South Carolina. Again, looking at who's going to get what in terms of the feet of storm surge, we're looking at red being the highest just to the south of Cedar Keys, upwards of 11 feet of storm surge expected there. Another area that we've been watching very closely, down towards Tampa, 7 to almost 9 feet of storm surge expected in the Tampa Bay area. It's all because of how the winds are going to be driving in on the right side of this storm system, coming in off of the Gulf of Mexico and brushing a lot of that water on shore. We have several areas, even to the south, may not even be that close to the cone forecast, but still looking at 4 feet, 5 feet, even upwards of 7 feet of storm surge expected because of how fast that wind is pushing all of this ocean water on shore. We head down towards Key West. We have upwards of 2 to 3 feet of storm surge as well. But remember, Key West actually sits very low to the sea surface. So we could see that impacting areas like Key West, even if it's 2 feet of storm surge being an impactful situation. We head over towards the Atlantic coastline here from North Carolina on south, back down towards Florida, anywhere between 3 to 4 feet of storm surge expected as Idalia exits off out towards the Atlantic. This taking us probably Thursday into Friday by that time frame. Looking at the evacuation zones, we have a number of folks that are in that brighter shading of red, that being zone A. That is a mandatory evacuation zone. So a lot of folks have been asked to leave from Cedar Key through Horseshoe Beach back all the way over towards Port St. Joe. We do have a couple of zones that are also in the B or C zone that I believe are still optional to leave. But again, at this point in time, if you're in areas like Tampa where we could see upwards of 7 feet of storm surge, it certainly is going to be more so ideal to leave than to hunker down. You still have time to do that if you want to plan to leave and head a little farther inland. Storm surge, this is how it pretty much works out. So we have our average high tide, and that's going to be where it doesn't really impact anywhere on land. But as we have, again, that wind pushing all of that ocean water on shore, this can quickly become a situation of storm surge, which is life-threatening, Michael, in a lot of cases. And that's going to be the case in those areas that we see the storm surge well over 2, 3, 4, 5 feet of storm surge, upwards of 11 feet in areas like Cedar Key.
Yeah, and Kiana, you know, you mentioned kind of focus in on how the wind really begins to drive that storm surge, and Hurricane Idalia rapidly intensifying. The max winds, by the way, could get up to about 125 miles per hour by Wednesday morning. That's just in time for landfall as a powerful Category 3, perhaps getting close to a Category 4 storm. That's a major hurricane. And notice where that wind is. The yellow that you're seeing here, this represents tropical storm force winds up and over 40 miles per hour. The orange that you're seeing, those are hurricane gusts over 75 miles per hour. And again, we're going to see this not only on the coastline of Florida, but also as this drives through southeast Georgia, friends in Savannah, Tybee Island, eventually toward Charleston, and places like Myrtle Beach and Hilton Head toward Hilton Head Island. Here's what the wind forecast looks like. Particularly concerning, again, are going to be those winds that drive from the southwest right into Tampa Bay. So again, flooding is going to be a very real and present danger there. But the big focus, of course, is going to be what happens closer to the Big Bend of Florida. So folks in Apalachicola towards Cedar Key, you got to be paying attention to this like a hawk by first thing tomorrow morning on Wednesday, because that's when we're expecting landfall. So the 75 mile per hour plus winds, again, right along the Big Bend of Florida, Cedar Key, Port St. Joe, we're talking to you, and that landmass in between, that's really... folks taking pictures on the wall of Key West, jumping around. I am telling you, that is so incredibly dangerous.
It really is, and it's going to be a reminder that you need to stay away from the shoreline through the next 24 to 48 hours.
Get pulled into the water, that could be life-threatening.
It's very life-threatening, and we have the wind, we have the storm surge from Idalia. It's only going to get worse into tomorrow's landfall. We'll talk about how you need to prepare for this here on Fox Weather after this break.
We do this each time that we leave every single time, but this one looks like it's a biggie.
You do not have to leave the state. You don't have to drive hundreds of miles. You have to get to higher ground in a safe structure. You can ride the storm out there.
Can't make y'all leave, but I suggest you do.
And we are in the final countdown until we really experience the impacts, the full impacts of Hurricane Idalia as you look live in Key West, Florida, where, again, storm surge between 1 to 3 feet expected. We're watching this camera very carefully. Obviously, Kiana, a dangerous predicament that you're putting yourself in when you're standing on the edge of the water. You look at the person right behind the trees there. They fall into the water, you get sucked in, and now someone's calling for help. They're calling the police, and now the police are in danger. Obviously not what you want to be doing when we're talking about an approaching hurricane.
Exactly. You have to remember that the police do have other places to be other than, rescuing folks who are playing by the side of the water. So just keep that in mind. Hurricane Idalia is only going to rapidly intensify from here. We're already starting to feel those outer bands. This is the southernmost point of Key West, and things are going to worsen as we head into the next 24 hours.
Yeah, life-threatening weather arriving in less than 24 hours. The time to prepare and evacuate is quickly closing, with almost 5 million people in the path of this cone, with millions more facing dangerous storm surge.
That's right. Fox Weather has a full team of coverage this entire day into landfall tomorrow. We'll have the latest here, and we'll be here with you every step of the way.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sticking with us right here on Fox Weather. I'm Michael Estime.
And I'm Kiana Lewis. And Michael, we talked about where things stand right now with Hurricane Idalia. Still a Category 1 storm, still has room and opportunity to be a Category 2 and 3 storm as we head into less than 24 hours of a landfall.
Yeah, you look at the water temperatures, and it really just feels like all of the necessary ingredients. You look at the water temperatures, you look at what's going on upstairs in the atmosphere, and there's not a whole lot of hostile winds. So there's not much at this point that's preventing Idalia from really strengthening into a major hurricane.
That's exactly right. And we're already starting to feel those impacts even as we are in the thick of today. I mean, those outer bands have already whipped up a tornado warning in some areas across Southwest Florida. We've seen some higher winds start to impact, upwards of, I think, 40 miles per hour so far. So we're starting to feel those inner impacts, and it's only going to worsen as we head into the next couple of hours.
Let's get you started to show you what we're tracking for you this very moment. What you'll notice is over 321,000 Floridians are in the cone, and really the line of fire, with over 4.5 million Americans in the cone when you take into account Georgia and then parts of the Carolina coastline. Here's what the currents look like: 85-mile-per-hour winds. Its movement has doubled since yesterday, up to 14 miles per hour toward the north. Friends and family in Key West certainly feeling those effects. You, of course, saw that imagery that we were showing you with the folks kind of playing around the southernmost point of the United States there. Otherwise, from Tampa, St. Pete down toward Fort Myers, that unfortunately was so heavily hard hit last year with Hurricane Ian, once again under the gun, getting sideswiped by some of those spiral rain bands. We have hurricane warnings that not only extend into the state of Florida, but also into Georgia. Obviously not common at all. You look at places like Valdosta, Georgia, Tifton, Georgia, where we have tropical storm warnings and hurricane warnings that are in effect. That means that you can expect hurricane force winds and conditions. You don't see this very often. Song and Soul of the South, here's where we are in parts of Bibb County. You go down to Houston County, where the Air Force Base is. That's Warner Robins Air Force Base. And then you get into the southeast Georgia coastline. Tropical storm warnings, tropical storm watches that far inland. It is quite the sight to see. Here's what things look like as we speak. This spiral rain band, by the way, meteorologist Haley Meyer and I were looking at this a moment ago. This is over 500 miles in length. So you look at places like Havana, Cuba, by the way, and then we put this into a 3D perspective for you, and you can clearly see just the size, the breadth, the scale of those rain bands. That's a tremendous amount of rain, and all of this is working generally toward the north. And as it does so, it's going to be whipping in not only rain, but wind, a ton of moisture. You'll see that kind of that segregation, if you will, between the drier air and then, of course, the much more moist and wet air. And it doesn't seem as if we're seeing any of that dry air wrapping into the circulation. We typically would like to see that happen if we wanted to see this thing decelerate. But unfortunately, Kiana, that's not happening. So again, it is basically full steam ahead for Idalia.
That's right. And Hurricane Idalia is going to have a clear path as it continues to push towards Florida. As the storm strengthens, mandatory evacuations were ordered by the state in 22 counties, and this does include Clearwater Beach. That's where we find Fox News national correspondent Rebecca Castor. Rebecca, where you are right now, not yet feeling the outer bands of the storm, but they're not too far away as you're a little closer towards Tampa and one of the outer barrier islands.
That's exactly right, Kiana. Today, as cliche as it sounds, it truly is the calm before the storm for Floridians. The beautiful scene behind me could be pretty misleading, but we know in less than 24 hours that heavy rain and wind is going to start making its way here.
Idalia strengthening into a hurricane on Tuesday, hours after making landfall in Cuba. Torrential rain quickly flooded streets and homes on the island. The storm is now churning toward Florida, prompting evacuation orders across the state's west coast. Officials urging everyone to listen to these warnings and get out while they can.
You do not have to leave the state. You don't have to drive hundreds of miles. You have to get to higher ground in a safe structure. You can ride the storm out there, then go back to your home once the storm passes.
Forecasters expect Idalia to whip up hurricane-force winds and life-threatening storm surge starting late Tuesday. People are now racing against the clock to board up homes and businesses, fill sandbags, and stock up on essentials. But despite living through many of these storms, some folks here say this one feels different.
It's coming fast. We don't have the typical week or week and a half prepared time.
Thousands of National Guard members and airmen remain on standby ahead of Idalia's arrival, and utility crews are in position to respond to any outages. As the storm moves north, officials in Georgia say they're prepared for any scenario.
There could be a need for shelters to be set up. There could be a need for, feeding stations, blankets, tarps, all of those things.
The Coast Guard is also staging rescue boats now to immediately respond after the storm. Michael, Kiana, back to you.
Thanks so much, Rebecca Castor. Stay safe out there as we continue to watch Hurricane Idalia. We are going to look as we are preparing for Hurricane Idalia across areas like Cedar Key, Florida. You're under a hurricane warning and right in the path of that potential storm, the potential path for this storm, I should say. We look at what's to come when it comes to Hurricane Idalia. I mean, we're watching some of the outer bands already impacting areas. But as we look, say, 12 to 24 hours from now, we'll have likely a potential landfall in the Big Bend of Florida, and then eventually it driving off towards the north into the southeast. Areas like southeast Georgia, as well as South Carolina and North Carolina are going to be feeling the impacts as well. The cone right now is an indication of where things are possibly going to extend later into this week. We have a Category 1 storm, as we mentioned, for Hurricane Idalia, with the potential of seeing it to further strengthen. Look at our winds that are going to be expected as we head into tonight, upwards of 105 miles per hour, making at some point it a Category 2 storm before making that landfall as a potential Category 3 storm, with winds as high as 125 miles per hour possible. We look at our exclusive Fox model. As we've already been feeling some of the outer bands, we'll continue to do so heading into later tonight. By tonight, 9 p.m., we're looking at areas like Tampa, Sarasota, down towards Fort Myers to feel some of those outer bands, and could even start to see our first indications of some storm surge as, again, those winds are going to push a lot of that water on shore. We continue to see that through the later half of tonight into the overnight hours, and eventually by tomorrow with that landfall early into the morning, say 9 to around noon, we can see that potential landfall. But this takes us through at least Thursday. As we head into Thursday, 6 p.m., we still have, at this point, likely the remnants or at least a depression at some point of Idalia offshore, but still offering up a lot of rain for the southeast. So by Thursday afternoon into the evening, we're still feeling impacts from this. There's a lot of deep, rich moisture that's going to be wrapped up in Idalia. We have moisture coming in from the Gulf of Mexico. Eventually, it's going to tap into the moisture from the Atlantic. And we also have a cold front that's acting as a squeeze plate that's going to allow for a lot of that rain to filter into this zone from Florida's Panhandle up into North Carolina. Look at these rain totals. They're impressive. I mean, 3 to 5 inches of rain for areas like Horseshoe. But you'll notice in the Panhandle, Tallahassee, down towards Panama City, we actually see higher rain totals, 5 to 8 inches of rain expected, as again, a lot of that rain is going to be filtering in and squeezing out over the region. By Wednesday, we see our biggest rain threat and flash flood threat over the southeast from Georgia up into North Carolina. We still hold that threat, even heading up towards Virginia as we head into Thursday. Michael?
And Kiana, another thing that we're going to be watching, not just the rainfall threat, but also that storm surge threat. What you're looking at live right now is the southernmost point of the United States. This, of course, it's literally called the southernmost point concrete buoy. It's located, as you know, at South Street and Whitehead Street. What's interesting is that it only stands about 18 feet above sea level, but the actual buoy itself that you're looking at there that's painted is about 12 feet in height. And boy, we were actually watching folks actually climbing and trying to scale that thing. It is so dangerous to be out there, especially not only is it wet, it is slippery, and then again, you get a bunch of folks there that are taking pictures. Again, it is a more dangerous spot to be. we're going to just hope for their safety. What you're looking at right now is, of course, parts of Orlando, Florida. Orlando, we're expecting this area to get inundated with some rain. So 91 degrees, the current temperature, wind at about 8 miles per hour. Those winds, of course, expected to pick up, especially during the late evening, the overnight hours, and then into early tomorrow. Here's what the forecast looks like for Orlando. About 1 inch to 2 inches of rain expected. But again, those winds upwards of 50 miles per hour, certainly possible. And keep in mind that 2 inches of rain might not sound like a big deal, but when it's a wind-driven rain, and again, you have so many people that are evacuating to places like Orlando, you'll have to watch out for higher water levels over some of the roadways, I-4 being one of the main thoroughfares. Look at those winds by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. That's 40 to 50 miles per hour is what we're anticipating. That lasts through the day. So 40 to 50 mile per hour winds also means there's an opportunity for a couple of downed trees, perhaps even a couple of downed power lines. Things don't really begin to settle until we get to late Wednesday evening, during the overnight, and then into early on Thursday. Those wind gusts, relatively similar, upwards of 40 to 50, perhaps even close to 60 miles per hour at times. So if you're joining us from there, Orlando area, if you're joining us from, say, the Villages, again, this is going to be something that you'll want to watch through the late evening and the overnight hours. Now, evacuations are already underway up and down Florida's Gulf Coast. What you need to know as Hurricane Idalia approaches, we'll have it all for you right here on Fox Weather, your Hurricane HQ.
feeling about it?
A little concerned. It's coming fast. We don't have the typical week or week and a half prepared time. So today we're scrambling a little.
I would rather tell them tomorrow, the next day, I'm sorry you evacuated for a day, but you're safe, you're alive, than having someone having to go to their funeral because they waited, they can't get out.
It's one of those things, it's a call to action. You want to do everything that you can to protect not only your property, but your life as well. Tampa International Airport suspending all commercial operations for good reason.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sticking with us right here on Fox Weather. I'm Michael Estiman.
And I'm Kiana Lewis. And Michael, the danger is only rising when it comes to Florida and the approach of Hurricane Idalia. You talked about how they even suspended tolls in some counties so that they can allow for that evacuation, rightfully so. But we do want you to take all of the precautions that you can when it comes to the storm.
Yeah, I think it's called the Sun Pass. And, down in Florida, if you've ever driven maybe to Disney, kind of going around the area, there's like 1,001 toll booths that you go through. But what's so nice is that the Florida Department of Transportation said, hey, listen, no tolls. If you need to get out of Dodge, we're making it free for you to get around the state.
Yeah.
So it just is a factor that just kind of helps in the evacuation process. There's a lot of storm surge, and this is going to be something that we're talking about a lot, Kiana, in the next 12 to 24 hours. Storm surge already arriving in places like Key West, Florida. We're going to bring you there live right now. You can see folks trying to pose for the camera and get pictures, but look at those waves. Look at those waves, though, behind that individual. Again, they're pretty mighty. Again, just to have waves lap up and over that, is pretty significant. Keep in mind that was damaged by Hurricane Irma back in September 2017. It's about 90 miles away from Cuba. Let's get you to the very latest and show you what is going on right now with Hurricane Idalia, because again, we're expecting it to continue to strengthen, and it has its eyes set on places like Tampa with storm surge, especially in and around Tampa Bay, Old Tampa Bay. Those are going to be areas that we'll have to watch very carefully because that storm surge could be life-threatening. Heavy rain, flooding, gusty winds, all expected. And when we say gusty winds, we're talking about 125-mile-per-hour winds projected and expected by Wednesday morning. All areas shaded in pink. Not only does it include the Big Bend of Florida, basically from Apalachicola down to Tampa, but inland. Yeah, if you're joining us from Georgia and you're looking at your cell phone and you're like, what is that, a hurricane warning in Georgia? Absolutely. The reason is because even when this begins to make landfall on Wednesday morning, it's going to take its time. And as it moves inland, yes, it's going to weaken, but it'll still maintain hurricane strength. And it is the reason why parts of southeast Georgia, Macon, Warner Robins included in that, are going to feel the effects. And just because I want to mention it, we have the world's busiest airport, Atlanta Hartsfield Jackson International, not too far from it. Could we see major cancellations and delays because of how close Hurricane Idalia is? Absolutely. So note that even places like Atlanta need to just make sure that they're paying very close attention to this system, because we'll see ripple effects throughout the country from Atlanta Hartsfield Jackson International Airport to Tampa International, again, that suspended all commercial operations. Down around Miami could see some effects. Certainly Orlando, if you're flying in or out there, perhaps toward Melbourne, Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood International Airport, seeing those impacts. One thing I want to point out is the fact that there's a lot of convection, there's a lot of lightning that we're seeing with these storms. Fort Myers toward Fort Myers Beach, you're already seeing some of these spiral rain bands that are now moving onshore. And as they do so, it's going to bring with it not just a heavy rain and wind threat, but also a tornadic threat. We've already seen parts of, say, Marco Island. We were tracking this earlier this morning where we had a tornado warning that was issued just because of the little spin-ups. Visible satellite imagery just showing you where that center of circulation is right here. We're also, of course, within the center of circulation, seeing, again, that wraparound, and that's going to be pulling in a lot of water into those little tributaries and those inlets. So watch for it. Interestingly enough, we're not seeing very much dry air. Here's where the dry air is, by the way. Typically, if we were to expect weakening, you'd expect to see some of that dry air getting sucked into the storm. That's not happening, and that's the reason why it is basically all systems go for seeing Hurricane Idalia strengthen, Kiana, into at least a Category 3 major hurricane. And as Brian Norcross was saying, there's an opportunity that we could actually see perhaps a low-end Category 4 winds associated with it when we're talking about the wind gusts.
That's right. He said to prepare for that range. I mean, we're only about 5 miles per hour from making it a Category 4 storm. And already so, the west coast of Florida is seeing some of the early impacts when it comes to Idalia. Fox Weather's Britta Merwin, she's in Tampa. Take a listen to her experience. We're starting to see the winds pick up here in your live shot, Britta. How are folks responding as the storms are approaching the coastline?
You know, Kiana, we've had a couple residents come up to us this morning, kind of expressing that they're feeling a little nervous this go around. I spoke to one gentleman live on Fox Weather First. His name's Sam. He's a lifelong Tampa Bay resident, and he feels like they have gotten very lucky. And I would agree with him. I mean, there's been a couple close calls. Of course, they've had scary moments, but we haven't seen a peak storm surge setup in a really long time. And you do not have to have a direct landfall to have the worst experience of your life when it comes to hurricanes. And when you look at the Tampa Bay area, the positioning of having landfall around the Big Bend is worst case scenario for Tampa Bay. That means we're on the dirty side of the storm. We have the optimal fetch. That's the distance that the winds have to carry over the Gulf of Mexico. And Tampa Bay itself, on average, is only 12 feet deep. You know, that's a lot of water. You know, it's a short depth, and that's part of the problem because it's a lot of water that has to move through a very shallow depth, which means it's all going to end up here. So this is old Tampa Bay. I'm on the seawall right now. Kiana, Michael, just looking down. I have about 3 feet of give. So if we got worst case scenario in this location, that would mean about 4 feet over the seawall. That's water here. I mean, that means that the homes that are to my side are going to be inundated. So we'll have to see how things unfold. I'll let you know I'm not going to be here. After our conversation, I'm hopping on the road and heading towards Gainesville to give everyone an idea of the inland impacts because it's going to be far stretching for the Sunshine State. I do want to point out the clouds over here. You see how it looks a little darker? That's actually the outer rain bands. And when I showed up this morning about 8 hours ago before the sun was even up, they were about 120 miles offshore. I saw the lightning off in the distance, didn't hear the rumbles because, of course, really far away. But now those outer rain bands are 60 miles away. They're getting closer. The winds are picking up, as you can see, and eventually the winds will be so strong that they have to shut down the bridges. That is the closest bridge that I am located to. That's the Howard Franklin Bridge. It connects Tampa to St. Petersburg. And once the winds are over, 45, 50 miles per hour, they're going to have to shut it down. Mandatory evacuations are out for Zone A. That is what you're looking at. This is Zone B. And a lot of residents that we spoke to this morning, they're preparing to leave in case they're asked to leave. We did have local officials, a couple of police officers came up, introduced themselves, said hello. They were concerned about our location here. They were happy to hear that we're going to pack things up and head to another spot.
I'm happy to hear that as well, Britta. I know you got a lot on your hands out there, just now getting into the start of what could be Idalia across the Tampa Bay area. We'll keep a close eye on you and check in with. And you can already see some of the storm surge is rising here in areas like Key West. This is just a preview of what the Florida's Gulf Coast is going to be seeing as Idalia arrives to the area. We do have folks out and about taking pictures, sending them safe thoughts, but nonetheless, you can see the waves crashing up across this buoy. This is the southernmost point of Key West in the United States, about 90 miles off from Cuba. So we're seeing those waves, they're crashing in. The start of what's to come when it comes to the possibility of storm surge across parts of Florida, Southwest Florida, dealing with, again, a storm surge warning that's in place. That stretches from Apalachicola all the way down through parts of Fort Myers, and we see a watch that extends all the way for southern portions of the state as well, including Naples. This is where we can see the highest threat when it comes to the storm surge. Again, look at our winds. That onshore wind is going to come crashing in when it comes to the waves across Southwest Florida. We also see a watch that's in place. This is across parts of the southeast from Georgia through South Carolina, the Atlantic side of the state and the coastline under a storm surge watch from St. Mary's all the way through out Charleston because of that onshore flow. This coming in on the southwestern side of the hurricane and eventually crashing into the shoreline there as well. And our storm surge, it really ranges in feet when it comes to areas that are going to be impacted. We watch Tampa for up to 7 feet of storm surge. We watch areas like Cedar Key up through Perry for 15 feet. And we even see that extend off towards the west Apalachicola, seeing upwards of 5 feet of storm surge as well. Heading south down Florida, we can also see upwards of 5 to 7 feet from areas like Fort Myers through Tampa Bay, an area that is vulnerable when it comes to storm surge. And Michael, we'll have to continue to really monitor how things are going to unfold as Idalia approaches Florida in the next, say, 12 hours with a landfall.
Yeah, the next 12 to 24 hours are going to be imperative that you are doing everything that you can to protect your property and, of course, your livelihood. Here's what the wind field should look like. Of course, we had the hurricane hunters that flew in there, and as of 11 o'clock this morning, they mentioned that the eye itself of the storm was about 20 to 25 nautical miles in diameter. What you're looking at right now is the tropical storm wind field. Those are areas shaded in this yellow coloring, and here's what's interesting about that. It is a huge, huge chunk of real estate from Valdosta, Georgia, all the way down through Atlanta. And then when you do the little cross-sectional analysis, basically from, Cedar Key up to Jacksonville and St. Augustine, Florida, that's a huge tropical storm wind field of winds over 40 miles per hour. And then, of course, that center is hurricane force wind gusts over 75 miles per hour. And then the red that you were seeing was actually the bullseye where we are expecting to see over 75 mile per hour winds. What's that mean? It means numerous downed trees. It means numerous downed power lines. It means that you need to have those generators ready and set to go. You can, of course, see where Apalachicola is, where, of course, Cedar Key is. It's going to be this whole chunk of real estate. The Big Bend is what it's called of Florida. That's going to be susceptible to some big time storm surge, but not to be left out. Tampa, St. Pete, same sort of story.